Introducere Eyal Dror. Han har jeg blitt kjent med personlig nede i Israel. Han, altså oberstløytnant Eyal Dror, må jeg nesten tilføye, for han skal nå fortelle om noe som er veldig spennende. Han har ledet et sånt nødhjelpsprogram som heter Operation Good Neighbour, som var på Golan inn mot Syria fra 2016 til 2018. Hvor de ga medisinsk hjelp, og de hjalp med infrastruktur, og så videre, og sivilassistanse. Og jeg har møtt han flere ganger i Israel, og han har blant annet tatt meg med opp på Golan, helt inn på grensen til Syria der, og vist hvor de jobbet. Og dette her, vi har forsøkt å få Eyal til Norge nå i noen år, og det er takket være covid-restriksjoner og slik, så har det vært helt umulig. Så jeg har mistet tellingen på antall forsøk vi har hatt, men nå er han her. Og for dette er en rørende, en sterk historie, en menneskelig historie som må formidles av han personlig. Så hvis jeg sier mer, så begynner jeg å fortelle det han skal si nå, så skal jeg overlate ordet til Eyal Dror. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Good. Assalamu alaikum. بإذن الله بكرة علينا العيد. كل الشكر والتقدير والاحترام لكم جميعا. أتمنى لكم مزيدا من التقدم والازدهار. دمتم ودمت دولة قانون. لن ننساكم أبدا. We will never forget you. A message I got in the end of July 2018 from a Syrian colleague. You can see him here. Of course, I cannot expose his face or his name from a security reason or his life. But he was a Syrian colleague, worked with me 3 years on the Israeli-Syrian border. And when I got this message for him, I understood that the biggest humanitarian operation led by the IDF ever, has come to its end. Good afternoon to you all. Hi. My name is Eyal Dror. I know that it was an introduction, but I don't know a word in Norway, so I will introduce myself in a minute in English. My name is Eyal Dror. I'm married to Michal, have 3 wonderful children. I'm really, really happy and excited to be here. Thank you, Kona. Thank you, Chital, for inviting me here. Thank you for what you are doing for my country. We are really appreciate it. I'm living in a small village in the upper side of Israel. We call it the Upper Galil. My village called Sde Nehemia. And I served 27 years in the IDF, 24 in active duty. I was serving 21 years in the coordination and liaison position with the Palestinians, serving Gaza and Hebron, and all over Judea and Samaria. In the last 3 years of my service, I was serving in the Golan Heights, in the Northern Command. In the last 3 years, I'm a reserve officer in the Northern Command. This is the command, this is the division that's protecting the Israeli-Syrian border. And today, when I retired 3 years ago, well, there is an old joke in the IDF that everything is divided for 3. I don't know why, but this is what they're saying about us soldiers. My life is also divided for 3. The first and the most important is spending time with my family. The really day life of officers in units, in the frontline units, it's life that you are not seeing much home. Most of my days, most of my nights was protecting about the country, on my country. So today I'm trying to spend time with them. The second part is writing. I'm writing my PhD, and I wrote a book about the Golan Heights, story about what happened that I will share with you. And the third is meeting with people and trying to share as much knowledge as I can with you. This is one of the topics of the lecture. Tomorrow we will speak about other issue. So with your permission, I will go ahead. And if I want to describe for you Operation Good Neighbor, the topic of our conversation in just one slide, I will put this one. I will again read in Arabic. By the way, this is my way to say to you, or to say sorry for my English, because Arabic for years was my second language. The first of all was Hebrew. English is just my third, so I'm sorry for the mistakes that might happen. We can continue to do it in Arabic if you prefer. But I know that the man that translated told me that he doesn't know much Arabic. But it is written here, Shukran Israel al musa'ada wal hub. Thank you, Israel, for the help and love. But more important than what is written is who wrote it. A Syrian child that was hospitalized in Israel and drew it for us. A picture that 10 years ago, for the people who knows a little bit the history between Israel and Syrians, it was impossible. Our Operation Good Neighbor, make it happen. A short introduction, how we arrived to this operation. So I'm sure that some of you, if not all of you, heard about the Arab Spring. The demonstration in the Arabic world, which started in Tunisia and reached to Egypt and Libya, it also reached to Syria. However, for the Syrians, a couple of months later, it became a tragic event, a terrible civil war. 1 million people lost their lives. Today, I'm sure that you are seeing what is happening in Ukraine. What happened there is dozens of times worse. 1 million people lost their lives. 6 million refugees. They had to run away from the country. They are living in refugees camps all over the world. The country has been destroyed. But it happened in Syria. How it is connected to Israel? Well, let me show you the Israeli-Syrian border for 40 years. Yeah, we had 2 terrible wars with the Syrians. By the way, in the war of 73, my father's cousin, he was a lieutenant colonel. He was a commander of a battalion. He lost his life in a battle with the Syrians on Mount Hermon. But since the end of the war, it was a very peaceful border. By the way, not because the Syrians become fans of Israel, for their own interests. But it doesn't matter, because for us it was quiet. Civil war changed the situation. Some of our best friends arrived. When I'm speaking about friends, I'm speaking about ISIS. I'm speaking Al-Qaeda. I'm speaking about Hezbollah, and if I was misunderstood, I was joking by calling them friends. They are the people that swore to destroy the state of Israel. They are the people that swore to murder the Jews, and it doesn't matter where they are living in the world. And they were on the border. By the way, I will give you an example. If anyone has visited ever Israel, probably he was at this area. We call it Mount Bental. It's a very famous observation point on the Israeli-Syrian border. But take a look how Syria was looking like. 3 major players. On the right, it was the Assad regime, which had to escape from some places. The people who fought against him, make them run away. In some places, it was 1 kilometer from the border. In some places, like this spot, it was almost 30 kilometers from the border. By the way, speaking about the Assad regime, and we will speak a little bit more about it tomorrow, from the year of 2014, as a military person, I'm speaking about Iran, I'm speaking about Hezbollah, goes hand by hand. On the southern part, we found ISIS. And I just want you to think about a Jewish mom who is living here, approximately 10,000 Israelis living in the southern part of the Golan Heights, opening the window and understand that ISIS is less than 1 kilometer from their home, how they're feeling. And in the green area, we had a lot of different organizations with a lot of weapons. Some of them had nothing with Israel. Some of them were organizations like Al-Qaeda. But my job here today is not to speak about military solution. My job today is to share with you what happened to people who are living here. 200 250,000 human beings. 250,000 Syrians who were educated for years to hate the state of Israel without even knowing why. But this is the propaganda of the Assad regime. I will show you some pictures how they were living. By the way, it's not in a very good quality, but I think that everybody here can understand that when you're getting a picture from an enemy country, well, they cannot simply send it by WhatsApp or Google or, I don't know, in other ways you are using in Norway. People were living in tents. They were living in tents because their homes has been bombed by their own regime. People had to send their children to such schools. By the way, I forgot to mention that in the Golan Heights area, the temperature in the winter is very cold. It's freezing. We have also even snow. So try to think how children can learn in a school in a tent without heat warmers when it becomes dusk after the first rain. By the way, I don't know how many of you have visited ever a hospital. I'm sure that we all can agree that this is not the shape of an emergency room. But this was their emergency room, without electricity, without being sterilized. By the way, I will leave the pictures. In one of my first meetings with a Syrian mom, when I was asking her, how is Israel? Now, take a look at this situation. She crossed the border approximately at 4 a.m., in the middle of the dark. I asked her this question at 5:30. 90 minutes after she was in Israel, she saw nothing. Believe me, it's the middle of the night, but she told me, you have a wonderful country. So I thought to myself, okay, I know that I have a wonderful country, but please tell me why you think my country is so beautiful. And she told me, you know, when we entered Israel, the border was behind us, and we saw lights. What she saw is a small village in the southern part of the Golan Heights, maybe 100 homes. But she saw a light, because in Syria, they were living in complete darkness. By the way, if a person was fortunate enough to have a generator and was rich enough to buy some diesel fuel in order to operate the generator, he automatically become a target because it was the only light in the village. So the regime immediately will attack him. And then she said to me, I was in the toilet and I flashed the water. And I opened the tap and I had cold water and warm water. You have a wonderful country. I think that for myself and for my soldiers, it was the first time that we realized in which kind of inferno those people are living. And by saying that, one night in February 2013, 7 people, for the first time, decided to reach the border fence. It was scary for them. They were educated that we are the enemies. Our soldiers know that it might be Al-Qaeda. It was a huge threat for the both of the sides. By the way, when we asked the Syrians, weren't you afraid? They said, of course. By the way, they said something else. We knew that we are not going to go back alive to Syria. You will shoot us. So we asked them, so why didn't you arrive? Why did you arrive? And they told us, I will say that in Arabic it sounds better than living because death didn't take us. Aishin min qilat al-mot. This is, if I'm trying to translate, this is the meaning. They were living because death didn't take them. They were so desperate, so they decided to risk it all. But you know what? Israeli soldiers, by the way, speaking about Israeli soldiers, I remind you, 18, 19, 20 years old boys and girls. This is the Israeli soldiers. Not all of them are older than like myself. Most of our army are young children. They decided to open the border for the Syrians in the first time. For the Syrians, came to Israel, and after saved by the Israeli doctors, going back to Syria, it was amazing. Because they showed with their population that, hey, Israel is not what we thought it is. By the way, I will ask a question. If anyone wants to answer, I will take his answer. If not, I will answer on this question. What is the most common language speaking in Israeli hospitals in the northern part of Israel? Arabic. By the way, good for you. What is the second one? What is the second language? Russian. You will ask why. I will explain that. Back in the 80s, it was a lot of people from Russia arrived Israel, and they were sent to live in the northern part of Israel. Arabic, because in the northern part of Israel, there is the big places that the Muslims are living, Christians, Arab, Druze, which is another kind of minority, Cherkess, Bados, which are also Muslims, but a different kind. By the way, we are all living together. So if you will go to an Israeli hospital in the north, in one of the conversations, one asked me, so the Arab doctor will speak with you Arabic? I said, no, he knows to speak Hebrew. I can speak with him Arabic, but most of us do not know to speak Arabic. He knows how to speak Hebrew, but his first language is Arabic. For the Syrians, it was amazing, because for years they know that Israel is occupied by Jews, and there isn't any rights. This is what they've been told. By the way, this is what they told us. And here's some, they're in Israeli hospitals, treated by Muslim doctor and nurses, who is speaking with them in the same language, praying to the same God in the same way. They came back to Syria, and they started to share that Israel is not what we thought it is. By the way, 4,500 Syrians were saved by Israel in this first stage. It was happening between 2013 to 2016, then it continued, I will arrive to it. But in this period of time, we saved a life. By the way, speaking of saving lives, it's not people who fought. Some of them, yes, but it was mothers that was getting birth and something become complicated. It was children that were involved in car accidents and they were bleeding to death. And you saw how the emergency room was looking like. So all kinds of life-saving treatment that Israel could have provided, this is what we have done for them. And while the Israeli doctors say that their condition is good enough to go back to Syria, they go back. Of course, we coordinate with our colleagues on the other side of the fence. We met them on the fence, and they went back. 2016, I told you that in the beginning, of course, it was a lot of suspicious. They were afraid. 3 years later, both of the sides had something that we can call trust. They know that what we have done for them, and they ask for more help, not just life-saving treatment. And Israel decided, by the way, in a period of time that Israel, because of budget issues, closed military unit, Israel decided to open a new unit in the IDF, the Good Neighbor unit. I was privileged to establish that unit and serve as its commander. My mission was to think 24/7 about my enemies. Or if I will say it, not my enemies, human beings living in an enemy country. And to think, how can I increase dramatically all kinds of humanitarian aid that we can give them. By the way, it wasn't a successful start. This is a picture from my first operation as the commander of the unit, a total failure. I have a lecture that I'm speaking an hour and a half about failures and what we learned from it. I would just say that we didn't understand everything. By the way, when you are walking on a path that nobody walks before, you might do some mistakes. Fortunately, I had commanders that said it is okay. We know that we didn't do it ever in the Syrian front. We will take it under consideration. So we provided food and they burn it, and we learned that there is a fatwa. I don't know how many of you know the word fatwa in Arabic, but in the life that they are living, there is an Islamic court of law. It's like our Supreme Court of law. It's in their side, it's the Islamic court of law. And when you take a decision, a fatwa, this is how you goes. The fatwa was that it is okay to go inside Israel, to be saved by the Israeli doctors. But at that time, in 2016, it wasn't authorized them to get food, so they had to burn it. We learned from them, and we understood that what we can provide at that stage is medical treatment. So we had to think which kind of medical treatment we can do, not just life-saving. And I want to take you with me to the border fence. This is the place that I most like. This is the place that I spent hundreds of nights, the border between Israel and Syria, middle of the dark. And let's speak about the most exciting project that we did under Operation Good Neighbor. Let's speak about children. A project that was focused on children suffering from chronic diseases, not life-saving problems. Children with problems with their ears, heart, orthopedic or logic problems. Only thing that you need is to see an expert doctor. In a place that all the hospitals has been destroyed, the doctor has been murdered or ran away for their lives, and they have zero medications, and they do not have any electricity, you can understand that you will not be able to find an expert doctor. But I want to speak for a moment on this picture. Because going to save lives wasn't an easy job. It was one of the most risky things that I have done in my life. Why? I will explain. It wasn't a secret operation. It means that the enemy, and I'm not speaking about this mother, I'm speaking about my enemy. I spoke with you, I told you, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, they're watching us. They know that we are going there. A sniper can shoot. A missile can be launched. By the way, speaking about this lady, as an example, she could have lived 35 kilometers from the border. 35 kilometers is not, I don't know, like from here to Oslo, you take the car on the highway, 45 minutes you are there. For them to cross 35 kilometers, it means that they have to cross a lot of armed groups, to pay money, to promise promises. And what do you think will happen if in one of these points, checking points, a person will reach to a mother and will tell her, I know that you are going to meet the Israelis. Because we so love the Israelis, we want you to deliver them a special present. You know, unfortunately, in the Middle East, speaking about presents, it's always from the kind that make boom. And before she will answer them, I will not do so because I'm going to save my child by the Israelis. This guy will tell her, you know, my name is Muhammad, Musa, Yusuf, it doesn't matter. And I am from Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Ahrar al-Sham, it doesn't matter. We kidnap your husband and 6 children, so if you will not do so, we will murder them. What do you think this woman will do? I have no second thoughts. She will explode on my soldiers. This is the life that we are living. Our enemies is not playing a fair play. So you are going down the fence with high adrenaline. You don't know the risks. However, then you see this boy. Can you imagine a 4, 5 years old boy, something this high, the middle of the winter, heavy rain, and he's stepping, this is from the summer. This is not the boy, but I'm taking as an example. Heavy rain, and this boy is stepping barefoot. and his legs are bleeding. Can you imagine in your mind this picture? I can tell you that I'm not speaking as a lieutenant colonel. I'm speaking as a father. I'm speaking as a human being. It's something that you cannot accept. It's unacceptable to see. So the adrenaline was high, but then we saw them. We opened the fence. We let them cross to Israel. We took them by buses. And then we arrived with them to the Israeli hospitals. In the Israeli hospitals, while they were sitting and waiting for the treatment, we had an opportunity to speak with them. By the way, before we spoke with them, if there is something that I cannot forget, is the smell. A smell of a heavy bonfire. And the reason is because when you are living in a tent and you don't have any heat warmers, you have to burn everything you have in order to warm a little bit yourself. By the way, you don't also have an opportunity to get a shower, not once in a day, not once in a week, sometimes not once in a month. So the heavy odor of bonfire is something that, although 3.5 years I didn't meet Syrian children, is something that I cannot forget. And we were with them on the hospital. And we had the time to play with them, which is, you can agree, it's not a typical military role. I can tell you that I never dreamt in my life that I will play football with the Syrian children, with my uniforms, my ranks, my gun. And then in one of the days, I asked one of them, tell me, aren't you afraid from us? And he told me, no, you are not Syrian soldiers, you are Israelis. I'm not afraid of you. And then it was a meeting with this boy. And I was asking him a very simple, a very basic question. Again, I told you, my Arabic is much better than my English. Believe me that he understood what I'm asking him. And I was asking him, tell me, when you will be adult, what do you want to do with your life? He wasn't answering. When I asked my girl, my 11 years old girl, this same question, well, she's changing her mind. Sometimes you want to be a famous dancer. Sometimes you want to be a famous doctor. And then I tell her, you know, Lihi, you should learn English well. And she told me, okay, Daddy, so let's forget from this doctor issue. And then she told me, I want to be a famous IDF officer. And then my wife, Michal, said, no, you are not going to be. But we have still 7 years to negotiate this issue. I hope that she will be, but she will be able to choose. This boy wasn't answering on the second time. And just before I started to check my Arabic, he was looking at me with these sad eyes, told me, I will not be an adult. I will die in a year or two. Can you accept the word that a 9-year-old boy cannot see his future? That a 9-year-old boy haven't any dream for the future because he knows that he will not survive. I can tell you that this was some motivation. By the way, this is how the operation was looking like, but what happened was amazing because the Israelis collected second-hand shoes in order that the children will not go back home with barefoots. And I told you before that it was the most exciting thing that I did with my life because, take a look at this picture. Because when we saw the children smiling, we understood that we are doing the right thing to do as human beings. And it is not connected to politics, and not connected to Islam, and that they are Muslims, we are Jews, they are Syrians, we are Israelis. We are doing the right thing to do. By the way, if any one of you have ever read an Holocaust survivor testimony, he will be able to find that what kept them alive back in the 40s was one word: hope. what we did, beside of saving their lives, and maybe even more important than saving their life, was to give them hope. 1,400 children entered Israel during this project, retreated in Israel, and went back. By the way, when I saw this young soldier, by the way, he wasn't from my unit. He was from a special unit. His role was to secure ourselves when we were going to the fence. So why is carrying a child? This was a child suffering from ALS. And when his mom took him out of the bus, he just fell down and crashed on the land. This soldier left his position, ran to the boy and picked him up and walked with him 400 meters to the border, giving him back to his mom. When we closed the border and went back, I asked him, why you left your position? It's something that in Israel, in army life, you are not leaving your position. And he told me, please, don't be angry. I saw my brother there. I can tell you, thank you. I can tell you that this operation not just saved the life of the Syrians, it also changed our lives, our perspective about looking at the world. And we couldn't have done it by ourselves. We had to find colleagues. By the way, in the first stages, we asked the UN, the EU, government. We told them, we want to help the Syrians. People are dying. We will open the border for you. Please come inside and help those human beings. Nobody helped us. Politics, politics, politics. And I'm just wondering, we want to save life. Cannot we put the politics aside for 2 years? Let's save lives and then renegotiate it. So we had to find some NGOs, organizations that working in humanitarian aid, because again, the IDF, this is not our professional. And we found. If I will ask you who were the NGOs that worked with us, helped us, I'm sure that you probably will say, okay, it was some Israeli organization, and it was some Jewish organization, and you are totally correct. But they were the minority. They were the minority. The majority were Christians and Muslims organizations. Friendships Unlimited, Americans, Christians, living in the US, they built a field clinic. I just want you to keep you in mind this area, because tomorrow we are going to speak on it from another direction. So when tomorrow I will tell you the same place that the field clinic were established, just remember this picture. They built a field clinic. It was behind the fence, on the other side of the fence, in an area that is still controlled by Israel, but is on the other side of the fence. And what they provided to the Syrians was just simple antibiotics, ear drops, eye drops, everything that I'm sure that even in Drammen you just have to cross the road and you will find a pharmacy. In Syria you don't have any pharmacies. It has been destroyed. And you can see basic ultrasounds. By the way, 8,000 Syrians were treated in this field clinic, but we spoke about hope. They also gave them hope, because for these children, well, it was the first time in their life eating ice cream. How do I know it? In a place you don't have any electricity, you cannot have ice cream. And the first time playing with the teddy bears, they went back to Syria. What do you think they thought about Israel? What do you think they thought about the US? By the way, I remind you, US is the big Satan, Israel is the small Satan, or big devil, small devil. This is how represented in some Arabic countries. And the operation continued. By the way, we built a maternity hospital. A maternity hospital for the Syrians. And what does it mean? We provide them all the equipment. You want to see it? Here it looks like. I will not take responsibility for this carpet. No. This is not from Israel. Syrian taste, what can I say? But everything else was donated by our colleagues. A $50 million project. A $50 million project. Today there is approximately 1,000 Syrians. They are not babies anymore. They are, I think, 4 or 5 years old, that they are living thanks to what we have done. And you remember the slide of the fire, 2016, the first operation, the failure, the fatwa. It took us 350 operations, approximately, a year, to change this decision, to convince the Syrians that we are here to help them. When they changed the fatwa that allowed them to go all kinds of equipment, we sent them clothes, just coats. But think, please, again, the meaning of a coat when you are living in a tent in the middle of the winter. How can it save your lives? By the way, maybe you do math better than I do. Help me to calculate how many people we saved by providing 350 tons of coats and all kinds of food, from pasta to rice, oil, sugar, salt, all the basic groceries, and generator and diesel fuel. And here is another one. What you can see in this picture, again, a picture from Syria, so it's not very well, but what do you think it is in this picture? Ice cream. But shouldn't I told you that it wasn't any ice cream in Syria? I just said it. So how I got the picture of ice cream from Syria? In one of the days I got it, and from one of my colleagues, and I called him and started to shout on him, I will not going to provide you ice cream. I will not going to risk my soldiers for ice cream. It's not life-saving. And you start to laugh, which make me more angry. How do you disrespect me? And we are colleagues for 2 years. And it was continuing to laugh, so I understood that something I didn't understand well the picture. And he told me, my friend, do you remember that last week you provide us a generator and you provide us a diesel fuel? I told him, of course. And then he asked me, do you remember which day is now? I told you, of course. This is the beginning of your holiday. He told me, and what we are doing in our holiday? I told you, you are eating meat because this is what also we provide, and you are eating sweets, and we provide cookies and cooks for your holiday. And he told me, yes, but we use your diesel fuel and generator to operate an old refrigerator. We smuggled ice cream from Damascus. We risk our life to smuggle ice cream from Damascus. But thanks to the state of Israel, our children eating ice cream for the first time in their lives, I can tell you that this is not a life-saving event, but this gives them the hope to continue to live. I was very proud on this picture. 700 humanitarian operations. 700 times we chose to risk our lives for Syrians. 700 nights without being at home, and I can continue. 400 million shekels of donation of equipment that we got from our colleagues and we sent to Syria. Thousands of people that were treated in Israel and inside Syria. And unfortunately, the operation came to its end. It came to an end not because of an Israeli decision. It came to an end because due to the changes in the Middle East, the Russians entered the arena. By the way, they entered 2015. They started to conquer the area of Aleppo. And in the summer of 2018, they reached the Golan Heights, the Syrian side of it, of course. And they bombed the area for 6 weeks. 50,000 people were displaced. They ran away from their homes to the border, not in order to become refugees. But they knew that 700 meters, 800 meters from the border, not a single Russian airplane will arrive. But it was the middle of the summer. As I told you, the winter is very cold, the summer is very hot. and they were on open air. So we provide them tents. By the way, you can see, it is written here in Arabic, but it's written also in Hebrew. This is an IDF tent. We didn't have the time to get from our colleagues tents. It took them 3 days. So the first, we provide them IDF tents, so they will be able to live outside, and we provide them a lot of kinds of food that they will be able, because they ran away, they escaped with nothing. 6 weeks, we support them. By the way, when the Syrian regime reconquered the area, they go all back to their homes. And a couple of days before the border had been shut down, we had a last chance, or we went to our last operation. A single operation would have taken us between 30 to 45 minutes. Due to the risks on the border, we tried to minimize as much as we can the time that we were on the border. The difference, you can understand, the difference between 30 minutes to 50 minutes is not just I missed my train. It means that I will give another 20 pressure minutes to my enemy to organize themselves. So we try to do it as quick as we can. In July 2018, in one of the nights, we opened the border for 10 hours, for a whole night. I don't know how many of you have heard about the white helmets. If not, I strongly recommend it to Google them. They are heroes and they need some respect. White helmets were Syrians, civilians living all over Syria. When the war started, some countries, some European countries, the US, support them and train them how to save people. Basically, they were the first to arrive every place that has been bombed by the regime and save the lives of the people there. They were the first in 2014 to expose for the world that the Assad regime is using gas. If you remember, it was a very famous speech of former President Obama about it's called the red lines of President Obama. It was regarding the gas. The gas was used, the US did nothing, but this is another story. They were hunted in Syria by the regime, in any place that the regime arrived. So in our area, there was a couple of hundreds of them. The Israeli-Jordanian border was already closed. It was already conquered by the regime. So the only way for them to escape was through Israel. It was like an international operation because we got requests, not us, of course. Our leaders got requests from the countries that support them. And we had to go for the last operation. By the way, when we were there on a fence, we heard the shooting. We saw the bullets, the red bullets on the air. The clashes between the Syrian army and the rest of the rebels were 200 meters from us. And we opened it for 10 hours. We allowed to over than 400 people to cross. Men and women, children, babies, entire families. It was amazing to see them waiting on the Syrian side, in their homeland, grouping of fear. Crossing to Israel, remember the devil, the country that they were educated to hate, and when they crossed to Israel, they were smiling because they know that their life has been saved. The agreement was that we will rescue them, and we took them by buses directly to the Israeli-Jordanian border. They crossed to Jordan, and then they got some new identities for their lives. They are now living, some in Europe, some in Arabic countries, some even in the US. But they are living. They are living thanks to the state of Israel. And the operation had to be shut down. By the way, the Syrian regime, when they reconquered the area, the first thing that they did wasn't to rebuild the cities, the water pipes, the clinics. the first thing that they did was to put military police on the exits from all the villages to the Israeli border in order that nobody will be able to go to Israel and ask for more aid. The operation came to an end, and people often ask me, so was it worth it? What left? Take a look, please, at my last slide, and let's understand what left. What left is the flag of Israel, which makes me, of course, very excited and very, very proud. But the story behind it is something I think that you should hear. Because the story behind it is the story of Operation Good Neighbor. A girl, a 9-year-old girl suffering from severe diabetes. We met her on the border and we took her to one of the Israeli hospitals. The Israeli doctors said to us that 24 hours later she wouldn't have survived. 24 hours later she wouldn't have survived. But they saved her life. And she was spent here 6 months. And before she went back to Syria, she asked us how to draw the flag of Israel. So we explained her. And she did it. But I think that what is even more exciting is what she wrote here. She wrote her name, Wiham. And I think that this sign, nobody's need a translation. But I do want your help to let me understand what she wrote here. So what do you think she wrote here? Which word did she write here? Abu Yaqub. Who is knowing Arabic here? Thank you. So she wrote here another name. She wrote here Abu Yaqub. And now I'm going to ask you another question. Who is Abu Yaqub? By the way, Abu Yaqub, it means the father of Jacob, which go to Isaac. But she wasn't a religious girl. So she still wrote Abu Yaqub, the father of Jacob. But who is Abu Yaqub? You know that the Arabs, when they call themselves, they will not present themselves as Muhammad. He will call you, my name is Abu Badr, Abu Muhammad, on his first son. Who is Abu Yaqub? What do you think? I will tell you. Abu Yaqub is my Syrian name. This is how the Syrians used to call me for 3 years. So a Syrian girl who drew the flag of Israel and dedicated to an IDF officer that saved her life. This is the story of Operation Good Neighbor, something that was impossible a couple of years ago and become reasonable. Wiham will not forget us. The children with the ice cream will not forget us. 250,000 human beings on the other side of the fence will not forget us. Ask me, how do I know it? I will tell you. Because when I was 2 years and 2.5 years, do you remember that it was a time before COVID that we were flying? And so when I was in Warwick University in the end of 2019, I was sharing the same talk about humanity, about saving lives. I met some other group of friends, those BDS, who started to call that I'm a war criminal, and. The first people to respond against them were Syrians, refugees living in Europe that are following my Twitter. And they started to shout on them on Twitter and to write them, shame on you, he saved the Syrians. And it was a huge negotiation. How do I know it? Because until today, Syrians are calling my phone. Syrian colleagues, not Syrian from inside, they cannot call us, of course. They will be hanged to death now as collaborators. But Syrians from all side, out of Syria, is calling us. And I told you that I'm also a reserve officer, so I can also, without saying much, I can say also that I know it from my military position in the reserve. Syrians will not forget Operation Good Neighbor. Thank you very much for you.
Da blir det mulighet for spørsmål. Og da skal folk få lov til å komme opp på plattformen hit for å stille dem, slik man har gjort tidligere. Så er det noen spørsmål eller til Eyal, så er det bare å rekke opp hånden. Komme frem. Så da gir vi det en runde til. Er det noen som har noen, så er det bare, hvis ikke så... Konrad?
I understand there were different villages and groups of people that you helped, but in general, what happened to them after 2018, and how many of them still live in the Golan Heights, or do you think most of them have been displaced inside Syria or abroad?
So as much as we know, most of them are still living in the same villages. The Syrian regime, by the way, didn't like what we are doing. We destroy their propaganda. By the way, I'm the only Israeli that there is a Syrian program about him. There is a Syrian program in Syrian TV that represents Abu Yaqub as an intelligence spy, whose whole mission is to take advantage of Syrians. In Middle Eastern language, it shows me how we hurt them with this project. So during the operation, the Syrian regime threatened the Syrians. One day, when we will conquer you, you will all be treated as Israeli spies. As a mother that have now a chance to save her child and do not know what will happen in 2 years, of course she will choose to save her child. When they came back, when they reconquered the area in 2018, as much as we know, and we know, I think, well what is happening inside, they weren't arrested, the women, the children. Some of the boys, some of the people that were on the age of 18 and above, the agreements between the rebels and the regime was those people will have to go to service. In the Syria army, you have a mandatory service, and for like 8 years they were out of the army. So they put them in the army and they sent them for the death to fight against ISIS. But the women and the children that were getting aid, and the villages that were getting aid from Israel, as much as we know, nothing happened to them. On the other side, I can say that their life today are horrible. The regime is not fixing the infrastructure them. They all remember that they fought with them without connection to Israel. They fought with the regime. They were rebels. And again, in our neighborhood, people do not forget. So their conditions, the humanitarian conditions, are bad enough. But unfortunately, as much as the world didn't interfere in 2016, so today when there isn't any civil war, and I do it by quoting because even yesterday 14 people in the area of the Golan Heights, the Syrian side, were murdered. Every day people are dying, but it's not a war, so nobody in the world is watching about what is happening. So they are living, but in very bad conditions.
Så er det Tobias.
Well, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I have questions regarding the funding. Since you said that it was actually mostly Christian and Muslims organizations, and in regards to the Abraham Accord and so on, have you any interest from any Gulf donors to be able to participate in helping their fellow Arab people in this horrible situation that has evaporated over the Arab Spring and almost a decade after the start in 2011, since a lot of Arab countries have a very influential position during the Arab uprisings and all over. So my question is, have you felt stronger cooperations with the Arab Gulf monarchies after the Abraham Accord, and especially up during the funding, since a lot of them have a very wealthy countries and a good foreign service?
Well, just one thing. Abraham Accord was signed in 2020 and the operation came to an end in 2018. So we didn't have, at that time, a real cooperation with them. Arab countries from time to time sponsor the area of Syria. By the way, not much, not as they could have done, because again, they are wealthy people. I spoke about Muslims and Christians because it surprised us, but it was Muslims that were Syrians, they were living in Syria, they ran away years ago to the US, and they made their organization, it's called Rahma Relief. They are helping to the Arab countries, and they found an opportunity to help to this front. For them, it was also strange to collaborate with Israelis, because for them, although they are American citizens today, it was strange. And Christians, again, for them, it was because they wanted to help. They are focusing on humanitarian aid. So I just mentioned it because it was the operation that we were all working together, Jews, Christian, Muslims, without giving a second to our religion to interrupt. We were all human beings that have a holy mission to save other human beings.
Og siden vi litt sent ute, så tar vi siste spørsmål nå fra Søren Kjedelig. Vær så god.
Som as a UN soldier, I was allowed to cross from Israel and across that Good Neighbour, go to Damascus on a weekend. Well, we were a group of UN soldiers. And we were told in advance that under no circumstances must you have anything from Israel when you cross the border, because they will be very mad. And one of the soldiers had a coin, a 1 shekel coin in his wallet. And that took us an extra hour before we were allowed to cross, because they were really mad. I mean, so mad, these are grown-ups, but okay. When we drove into Damascus, then we could see these large areas that were fenced off with a wall. And then we were told that this is cemeteries for the next war with Israel. So, and there were several of them, huge, and there was nothing inside, was just grass growing. But that was the next war they were preparing for. So I'm thinking this is 1980, and I'm thinking what kind of a hate that there is in a population like that. But given then what happened, what you explained now, then my question is Israel just completely incompetent when it comes to public relations? Why don't we know more about this? Just, don't you care?
A good one. First of all, thank you for your service. By the way, those cemeteries, as much as I understand today, was used them to bury their 1 million people that they murdered by themselves and by ISIS, and not for the war with the Israelis. Israel, we are better doers than speakers. I can tell you about this specific operation that for 1 year, there was a lot of pressure on myself from very high-rank officers to publish this. And I said, no, we cannot do so because I still have to build the trust with the Syrians. I'm not going to be like all the organizations that giving a piece of flour or a piece of chocolate for a Syrian boy and taking a picture of him saying thank you to the organization, and then going to take money from other countries. We said that we are not here for PR. Just a year after, in July 2017, and after I felt very strong with the relation with the Syrians, I asked them and they said, yeah, go and speak about it. Be our voice to the world. And we started to speak a little bit for a year until the operation shut down. The operation shut down, Israel has more challenges. One of the reasons that I decided to retire the IDF and to share these stories, because I think that it's something that people should know. It doesn't matter if they are living in Norway, Germany, United States, doesn't matter. People should know, especially people who cares a little bit about Israel. Again, this is another way for me to say thanks to your this amazing organization that do care for Israelis and brought me here to speak with you. Again, we don't know how to do it well. We are trying, I just heard that there is Yusuf Haddad and Naftali Hanania, that they are also in Norway and other mission, but we are everywhere. Everyone is working for itself. It's not something that's organized by the country. Why, for 12 years, it wasn't like a center that will coordinate all of these activities, something regarding politics, something to other things that I really do not know and do not care. We should do more in the PR. By the way, we will not do it for PR. Israel is sending rescue delegation all over the world. Nobody is hearing about it. To Africa, to Haiti. When I met American officers, they told me that after the earthquake in Haiti, it took them, people of the US, to reach Haiti 5 days, while the Israelis, after 48 hours, were there. We will not do it for PR. But if we are doing so, I totally agree that we should speak a little bit about it and share this information with the world.
Det var siste spørsmål, men Eyal han en hyggelig mann, så det bare å slå en prat med han. Han med oss til I morgen, så han på middagen I kveld og alt. Så jeg skal bare takke av Eyal,